CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Paul Barber. Our top stories: the Taliban speak for the first time since taking over Afghanistan and set out a future for the country under their control.
Russia's ambassador in Afghanistan becomes the first foreign official to hold talks with the Taliban as Moscow begins diplomatic relations with the new regime.
Homeless Haitians braced themselves for Tropical Storm Grace after Saturday's devastating earthquake.
And Tesla shares hit a bump in the road after the United States launches a safety investigation.
The Taliban has been addressing the international community at their first press conference since they swept to power in Afghanistan. The group's leadership told reporters in Kabul that they didn't want any internal or external enemies and that the Islamic Emirates held no grudge against anyone.
The spokesman went on to say women will live within the framework of Sharia law and that no one from the United States or the international community would be harmed. Our correspondent Stuart Smith is in Moscow. Stuart, an extraordinary event, this press conference, after an extraordinary few days. Tell us what was said.
Yes, a press conference full of reassurances trying to address the main concerns of the international community. For example, promising that translators, soldiers and people who are seen by the Taliban to be seen in the eyes of the Taliban as traitors will be effectively, in their words, pardoned. That these people who are so concerned for their safety, some fleeing or trying to flee on flights, the Taliban saying it's fine. These people are effectively pardoned, and that there will be no revenge for those who worked against or worked with the so-called foreign powers. They also addressed this idea, one journalist asking, of the Taliban going door to door in Kabul and interrogating people, arresting people, taking them away. The Taliban says that nobody is going to harm you, nobody is going to interrogate you, families can return home and will be safe. And this other question, will Afghanistan become a place once again that harbours terrorists and that terrorist groups could use as a base to launch attacks across the world? Again, the Taliban says not, that Afghanistan will not be used as a country to initiate violence against anywhere in the world, reaffirming that point twice during the press conference, and that it will not be a safe haven for terrorists. Clearly, this is a group that wants the world to trust them.
What did the Taliban have to say about women and girls in Afghanistan?
Again, more reassurances that girls would be able to go to primary school up to university level, but the Taliban said this will be an Islamic state. It will be a country which follows Islamic law, strong Islamic law in their words, and that although girls and journalists have in the past women and journalists have in the past been able to work in that way for the past 20 years. One female journalist asked, will we be able to carry on like we did before? And that's perhaps where the mask slipped a little bit. The Taliban said that is something yet to be decided. So although assurances on education and on work, clearly the Taliban do see a change for women. It's not clear to us yet what that change will be, and potentially it's not yet clear to the Taliban, but it will be a change, and it will be along the lines of the of Sharia and Islamic law, which can, of course, have different interpretations. When the Taliban were in power between 1996 and 2001, though, women were largely confined to their homes.
The Taliban also held its first diplomatic talk since taking power. What more can you tell us about that?
Yes, well, Russia's ambassador in Kabul throughout this whole transition has been quite relaxed about what's going on. Russia is the first country to initiate diplomatic talks with the Taliban in Kabul, and its ambassador says that he's quite relaxed about the safety not just of the embassy but of the country, saying that the Taliban seems to be in control. There's no violence. He talked about people laughing on the streets and girls going to school unhindered. He seems relaxed about the change in power. Whether Russia will acknowledge acknowledge Taliban as the de facto government in Afghanistan. On Monday, we heard Russia will wait for a United Nations Security Council resolution. Today, we're already starting to see a change in the rhetoric, with Russia talking about looking to see how the Taliban act in practice and then making a decision on recognition. But it seems at the moment Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, is not wanting to make any firm conclusions, but is certainly leaving the door open to Russia registering the Taliban as the true authority in Afghanistan. And we know he has been talking with his US and Chinese counterparts about what exactly should take place. But he's keen that the Taliban, and it says the Taliban have made reassurances that other parties will be included in the formation of any new government.
Stuart, like the United Kingdom and the United States, Russia has a lot of historical baggage when it comes to the story of Afghanistan. I wonder what, if any, reaction on the streets of Russia there's been to the fall of Afghanistan.
Well, if you look at Russian state television, we are hearing a lot. All of these press conferences are being broadcast. The transition is being talked about. However, looking to, say, for example, veterans groups, people that fought in Afghanistan in the 1970s and 80s as part of the Soviet Union, these groups were heavily impacted by the war. There's a lot of bad feeling to the way that Russia's and the Soviet Union's presence in Afghanistan ended. So there's no chance of military action going on in Afghanistan. Whether the public mood has changed, I think we'll have to wait a bit longer to see. But consider the fact that the Taliban are still registered as a terrorist organisation in Russia, and that all media must declare that the Taliban are a banned terrorist organisation in Russia. And we see that under articles, even when the Russian government is talking about plans to talk with the Taliban, potentially recognise the Taliban as a new form of government. So right now it seems that the previous Russian rhetoric about the Taliban has yet to catch up with the way Russia is negotiating with the Taliban. But Russia has not just experience in the Soviet Union dealing with Afghanistan, it has experience over the past 7 years inviting the Taliban to Moscow for peace talks, trying to position itself as a trustable negotiator between the United States and the Taliban and the Afghan government. So Russia certainly sees a future for itself in intra-Afghan negotiations. Whether that means changing the Taliban from an extremist organisation and reclassifying it to something else, we've yet to see. But it seems like there is a delay in the previous policy towards the Taliban and what actually diplomats in Kabul are saying right now.
Stuart Smith in Moscow, thank you very much.
Meetings of both NATO and EU foreign ministers have been held in Brussels to discuss their responses to developments in Afghanistan. Let's talk now to our correspondent Lucy Hoff. So, Lucy, what has the Secretary-General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, been saying?
Well, Paul, there are similarities between what NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg and US President Joe Biden had to say. There was no explicit admission that the military operation from the US and NATO over the course of the last 2 decades was a failure. But both have admitted that lessons could be learned, and both have squarely placed the blame of the collapse of Kabul and Afghanistan to the Taliban at the feet of Afghan's political leadership. Jens Stoltenberg said the failure of that political leadership had led to the events of the last few days and, of course, the seizure of Kabul by Taliban forces. So fairly strong words, but there has been criticism here in Europe at the response of NATO in the last few days, which has been largely silent since Friday, tracking the events but not making any major public statement. That has now all changed. Jens Stoltenberg said that he had been taken aback by the speed at the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan, which had been expected. He talked of a binary choice, either continuing military operations, which would involve resending troops back to Afghanistan and resuming combat operations for the first time since 2014, or the full withdrawal of NATO forces following the United States. So let's take a listen to Jens Stoltenberg speaking from NATO's headquarters in Brussels earlier.
Parts of the Afghan security forces fought bravely, but they were unable to secure the country, because ultimately the Afghan political leadership failed to stand up to the Taliban and to achieve the peaceful solution that Afghans desperately wanted. This failure of Afghan leadership led to the tragedy we are witnessing today.
Lucy, what have we heard from the EU foreign ministers meeting?
Well, Paul, we're awaiting a press conference following that meeting, which was called as emergency talks yesterday by the EU's chief diplomat, Josep Borrell. We understand that EU foreign affairs ministers have been discussing how to prevent Afghanistan becoming a humanitarian and migration crisis amid fears that hardline Islamic rule in the country could lead to an exodus of millions of people who could be seeking to end up on European shores. Certainly France and Greece have warned that they don't want to see a repeat of the 2015 migration crisis. Greece has spoken out saying it doesn't want to become a gateway from Afghanistan into European nations, and French President Emmanuel Macron has said that he wants to work at preventing irregular migration flows, in his words. So this is about coordinating European nations' approach to migration, to working with Afghanistan's neighbours, such as Lebanon and Turkey, in terms of supporting anyone wishing to flee those countries. And of course, this is about the very immediate need to evacuate and rescue those personnel currently on the ground, both European nationals and also Afghan citizens who have been supporting European nations on the ground in the last few years. Those operations are still continuing. We know that Germany and the United Kingdom, as well as France, have seen flights leave Kabul airport over the course of the last 24 hours. So much on the agenda for European foreign affairs ministers, and more detail to emerge from that meeting with that press conference due to start this evening.
Germany and France have both hinted at an airlift of Afghan civilians in the near future. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, that's right. We know that a plane has left Kabul airport carrying French nationals and dual nationals, as well as reportedly some Afghan citizens. Germany has said that it will be willing to rescue as much as 10,000 people from Afghanistan. That will be made up, as I say, of a combination of German nationals, but also those who have been assisting the German operation on the ground in Afghanistan. The United Kingdom as well, saying that it will be willing to rescue some 7,000 to 8,000 people, with some detail to emerge of the specifics of that operation. But I mean, clearly these evacuation operations are taking place under enormously difficult circumstances. We are told that the situation at Kabul airport is now stable, given what we saw yesterday, those heartbreaking images of the US and other aircraft leaving the airport with Afghan citizens desperately clinging to the side of those planes, desperately looking to leave the country. Those images being broadcast around the world. The situation, we are told, is now very different, although we are being told that for Afghan citizens it is different. There are checkpoints around Kabul airport that are making the safe passage of those citizens somewhat different. So, yes, you're right there that French and German planes looking to leave in the coming days from Kabul airport.
Lucy Hoff in Brussels, many thanks.
Well, Lucy mentioned those evacuations. European citizens are continuing to be flown out of Kabul airport. Germany is sending a second aircraft to join French, British and American efforts already underway. This follows criticism after Germany's flight left with only a handful of people on board. Ryan Thompson reports.
In a time of crisis, with thousands clamoring for a way out, this German evacuation plane left Kabul with only 7 passengers aboard. It should have taken well over 120 people, but defense officials say there wasn't enough time to wait because of chaos on the ground. The A400M transport plane had a difficult landing, forced to circle the airport for hours, waiting for the runway to clear. Eventually, it did arrive with a critical delivery, hundreds of soldiers to escort Germans who are stuck.
We are prepared for all scenarios, and we know that this is a very difficult situation for the people on the ground, but also for the soldiers. It is a dangerous mission in which we are now sending them.
Those soldiers will get Germany's evacuees into Kabul Airport's secure military zone. That's where evacuation efforts to France, the UK and the US have been focused. Germany once had the second largest contingency, but that has long faded. Chancellor Angela Merkel told staffers behind closed doors Monday that her country was responsible for up to 10,000 people. But in front of reporters, the Chancellor did not address the evacuation in detail.
I also intensively discussed the situation with French President Emmanuel Macron today, and we will coordinate the evacuation as well as follow-up developments, and I believe there will be very close German-French cooperation.
French planes have been on the ground since Monday, evacuating hundreds via its military base in the United Arab Emirates. The diplomats and citizens who have just escaped arriving in Paris Tuesday afternoon. Both countries say they will continue to fly out of Afghanistan as long as possible and take with them as many as they can. Ryan Thompson, CGTN, Frankfurt.
Well, there are fears for human rights in the country now that the Taliban has taken over. Sunita Viswanath is from the organisation Women for Afghan Women. She explained the situation on the ground and said the future is uncertain for women and children.
We have several hundred staff, several hundred clients, the women and families and children that we serve, and all of their families who are at grave risk at this moment. We, over the last month or so, more than a month, have been evacuating slowly all our provinces and bringing people to Kabul. So luckily that had been done before August 15th. And at this point, everybody that is in Kabul is just sort of hiding while the city of Kabul is in utter chaos. And we are hearing from our staff that there is a lot of fighting, looting, kidnapping. People are our clients especially, are very scared and just sort of hiding out. And we, all of us who are not in Afghanistan, are working night and day to organize safety passage for everybody that we can get, either on people who are very, very high risk to get on planes out, and people who cannot get on those planes to make sure they're safe wherever they are and have somewhere to go. This has been the 24/7 priority for all of us, and that's what I've been working on with my colleagues. Really, we don't know. We don't know anything except that right now. There's nothing else to say, nothing else to do. There will be a time soon where we will know where the dust settles and what is possible. Right now, we have no idea. And so soon, I hope that all of our people will be safe and we can answer other questions about what is possible, whether we can keep working, in what form, what work we can keep doing in this new Afghanistan. But all of that is for the future. We have one priority right now, which is to keep our people alive and safe.
How much has life changed for Afghan women over the past 20 years?
Well, when we started in 2001, we started in New York. 2003, we went to Afghanistan. We were building things from scratch. When we arrived in Kabul, we saw rubble. All of our programs, all of the infrastructures, the schools, the universities had really come to a standstill and were being built up, from nothing. And so we witnessed, there being basically nothing working to today. Well, not today, but until very recently, girls could, count on going to school. Women could count on working and going to university. So women could enter politics. Women ran for president. Our staff in Women for Afghan Women are half men, half women. That too is an incredible statement on the Afghanistan that has come to evolve, which is that women's rights work for women and children and families was done equally by men and women working together. That too is a sign of a functioning, thriving, egalitarian society.
Remember, CGTN is available to watch for free on all major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. Also on YouTube and Dailymotion, as well as CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, no end to the flames. France becomes the latest European country to battle wildfires.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. In Haiti, rescue efforts are being hampered by Tropical Storm Grace following Saturday's earthquake. Tens of thousands of people have been left homeless. They're having to decide whether to brave the storm under tarpaulins or risk returning to their ruined homes. More than 1,400 people are thought to have died in the earthquake.
The situation is very hard for me. I have a lot of children with me and we're in the rain. I don't even have a piece of plastic to cover us to sleep.
We are in the rain. We have no place to go. The school shelter is not open. Where are the authorities?
French firefighters are battling to contain a fast-spreading blaze. It's forced evacuations from campsites around Saint-Tropez. Wildfires are also burning in Spain and Israel, and new ones have ignited in Greece. They're all being driven by continued extreme heat across southern Europe. Ross Cullen reports.
Dousing the flames, but still on guard as wildfires rip across southeast France. Nearly 1,000 firefighters mobilised to contain the blazes, just 50 kilometres inland from the popular Mediterranean resort of Saint-Tropez. Thousands of people were moved to safety from holiday parks and housed overnight in municipal facilities such as sports centres.
We were moved to safety in 30 minutes. It was very good. It was synchronised and there was no panic. Everyone was calm. Hats off to the whole team because they really did what needed to be done.
Me personally, with my family, I have 5 children. We left quite promptly. There were some people who had more time, but it's still scary when you hear it, where it explodes. It's scary.
This is what they were forced to flee. The blazes on Monday night fanned by strong winds. At the eastern end of the Mediterranean, Greece continues to battle fires. Emergency service helicopters dropping water to douse the blazes as residents from villages southeast of Athens are ordered to move to safety. 1,000 firefighters and 15 water-dropping aircraft have been fighting a fire burning since Saturday morning in Avila province, 110 kilometres west of Madrid. But there has been some respite for Spanish firefighters, slightly cooler temperatures and lighter winds not fueling the flames further. Ross Cullen, CGTN.
Rescue teams in China are racing against time to reach 19 workers trapped in a mud-filled coal mine. Local authorities say part of the mine shaft collapsed on Saturday. 2 miners escaped, although one later died from their injuries. Rescuers are trying to dredge debris and pump out water while supplying air to the trapped miners.
New Zealand has gone into a snap lockdown after the country reported its first coronavirus case in 6 months. The single case was reported in Auckland, the largest city. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, imposed the highest level of restrictions, meaning all schools and businesses will be closed and only essential services allowed.
Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam has warned organisations to avoid political agendas and not cross what she called red lines. Lam said the government would not hesitate to cut ties with professional groups, including top legal associations, if they get involved in politics.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the UK's largest semiconductor-making plant is sold to China despite security concerns.
The EU's digital COVID certificate, which offers the promise of unlocking hassle-free travel around Europe this summer.
In less than 2 weeks' time, the Czech border will also open to all EU and Serbian citizens. 4.4 million Hungarians received their first dose of COVID vaccine.
18 and over can receive a COVID-19 vaccination, but it does come with conditions.
Third wave will probably take longer to emerge. This vaccination centre is part of a massive effort to try and drive down the numbers of the new variant that was first identified in India.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Oh, no.
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Paul Barber. Our top stories. The Taliban in Afghanistan have held their first news conference in Kabul after seizing control of the country. Their spokesman said they wanted peaceful relations with other countries and would respect the rights of women, but within the framework of Islamic Sharia law. Zabihullah Mujahid also said they would not seek retribution against Afghan soldiers or people who worked for foreign governments.
He implied Afghan leadership, including former President Hamid Karzai, could be involved in discussions about the formation of a government. And he struck a more conciliatory tone towards the media, saying it should remain free, but stressed that journalists should not work against national values. He said the Taliban's takeover would benefit all Afghans.
Alhamdulillah wa kafa. Taking freedom is the right of all nations. The Afghan people, by using their legal right after 20 years of jihad, were able to take their freedom and clean the country from the occupation and occupiers.
The Pentagon says there will be more than 4,000 American troops at Kabul airport by the end of the day to assist the evacuation effort in Afghanistan. The US Army says the Taliban has not hindered the process so far.
Right now, we're looking at 1 aircraft per hour in and out of HKIA.
We predict that our best effort could look like 5,000 to 9,000 passengers departing per day. But we are mindful that a number of factors influence this effort, and circumstances could change. We have had no hostile interactions, no attack, and no threat by the Taliban. We remain vigilant. We also have not experienced any additional security incidents at HKIA.
US President Joe Biden has been defending his decision to withdraw troops while acknowledging that the Taliban's advances had been much quicker than expected. He warned the Taliban not to interfere with evacuation efforts. Jim Spellman reports from Washington.
U.S. President Joe Biden is facing intense criticism over the chaotic U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan and the rapid takeover by the Taliban. Biden acknowledged his administration underestimated how quickly the situation would deteriorate.
I always promised the American people that I would be straight with you. The truth is, this did unfold more quickly than we had anticipated.
Biden lays much of the blame at the feet of the Afghan government and Afghan security forces.
If anything, the developments of the past week reinforced that ending U.S. military involvement in Afghanistan now was the right decision. American troops cannot and should not be fighting in a war and dying in a war that Afghan forces are not willing to fight for themselves.
Political opponents in the U.S. are criticizing the chaotic pullout.
It's heartbreaking. I mean, this was completely preventable. It was completely predictable, too. And there was no effort at all to mitigate the disaster. I mean, not at all. There was no planning at all in this.
And from former military leaders who say the mission was flawed long before the U.S. withdrawal began.
The Taliban made progress. The government did not. We built security forces that in the end did not stand up, could not withstand the pressure from the Taliban. I'm afraid that we built a house built on sand.
Experts also warned the U.S. withdrawal could allow groups like al-Qaeda to once again use Afghanistan as a base for terror attacks. But Biden says he remains convinced he's making the right decision.
I stand squarely behind my decision. After 20 years, I've learned the hard way that there was never a good time to withdraw U.S. forces.
Biden says he didn't want to hand off decisions about U.S. troops in Afghanistan to a fifth U.S. president. Still, the debate about the decision to withdraw and how it has been conducted will likely go on for years after his presidency is over. Jim Spellman, CGTN, Washington.
Some commentators are now asking what Afghanistan means for the future of Western military policy. CGTN's Stephen Cole asked General Sir Richard Barrons, the former commander of the British Army's Joint Forces Command, whether he thought we may now see major changes in the way the West deals with conflict.
You know, I truly, truly hope so, because I think this is such a shock. This is such a blow to Western standing, reputation and strategic interest that it's going to cause some introspection. And I think the absolutely vital point for the West and many other nations that will come out of this is that this has turned out badly. We essentially gave up and left, and the outcome is not the one at all that we would have chosen. But we're now looking at a world which will be challenged by the rise of Asia and China in this century, by the profound instability that climate change is going to cause to societies, economies and relationships between states, and the shock of the digital age in the way that it fractures industries and societies and cultures in ways that are going to be, I think, genuinely historic. And I think the question for the West is, this didn't go well. We didn't stand up for our interests. But then we'll recognize that our interests, our true strategic interests in Afghanistan were pretty modest. But just coming down the road, there are things that are going to happen in our world where every nation is going to have to stand up with its friends to protect its security and its prosperity and its values and its interests. And the West is going to have to rediscover the will and the capability to go abroad and do that with its partners, or it'll just get pushed around. And I think that is the key strategic question that's come out of this debacle.
And you can see more of that interview on The Agenda with Stephen Cole this weekend here on CGTN.
China says it is willing to work with Washington to promote stability in Afghanistan, but Beijing has criticised what it called a hurried military withdrawal.
President Biden said that nation building was never the goal of the US in Afghanistan, and he's telling the truth. Because in Iraq, Syria and Afghanistan, what we've seen is an awful mess of unrest and division. America's role is to destroy, not to build. We hope that the US can now reflect on its policy of military intervention, stop interfering in the internal affairs of other countries, and stop disrupting the peace and stability of other regions, all under the pretext of democracy and human rights.
Tesla shares have fallen after safety regulators in the United States launched a safety investigation into a series of crashes involving the company's autopilot system. Let's talk to our correspondent John Terrett in New York. John, this is not a good week for the electric car maker, is it?
No, and it's only Tuesday. Can you imagine what is yet to come? I can't. Paul and Jamie, look, I think the way to think about this is that the bloom is coming off the rose a little bit. I think that's the way you should think about it. Because remember, Teslas are marketed as very much the future. You know, when you buy a Tesla, you are buying the exciting future that that company offers everybody, and you're also buying into Elon Musk, this very exciting guy from South Africa who now lives in the US and who does all these exciting things, including going into space. And I can tell you from Tesla's point of view, the notion of AI or the totally driverless vehicle is really their holy grail, but they're not yet there. They're not yet there. They're a long way from it at the moment. What they do have, though, is a thing called autopilot. Now, autopilot is not artificial intelligence. It's not the driverless car. What it is a kind of driver assistance system. It's designed to allow people who own Teslas to take their hands off the wheel for a few minutes. So if you're driving up the M1 near Leeds, or you're going back home to Wales, Jamie, over the Severn Bridge there, you can press, if you own a Tesla, a button, and the autopilot will take over. And with the cameras and the computers on board, it knows exactly when to speed up, when to slow down, when to overtake, and all that kind of thing. But it is not a driverless system. You are not supposed to be in the back seat while the car is moving. You're not supposed to be dozing off. You're supposed to be there just in case. But it's a major step towards artificial intelligence. That is true. Well, now what's happened is the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, which looks into all traffic accidents around the United States, has begun a formal and potentially quite long investigation into Tesla Autopilot because they have observed 11 crashes, 17 injuries, and 1 death. And the thing that links the investigations, all these crashes together, is that they all happened involving Teslas and emergency vehicles. So I think what this means is because emergency vehicles have so many cameras on them these days, as indeed do Teslas, I think that they're going to get a lot of information just from the camera data, which they will be able to retrieve. 700,000 vehicles involved in this recall. Teslas built after 2014 are going to be looked at. And the National Highway Traffic Safety Authority says that it wrapped up a probe into this situation, this autopilot, in 2017, and at that point offered no action. And it has come under an awful lot of intense heat for doing that. So now they're coming back for a second go. Tesla shares down 4% on Monday, 4% now. No comment from Tesla, but Elon Musk has tweeted. Back in April, he wrote this: Tesla with autopilot engaged, now approaching 10 times lower chance of accident than average vehicle. And what could NHTSA do to Tesla? Well, they could order a massive recall of all those vehicles and potentially many more, which would be very embarrassing to Tesla and, of course, would give an edge to its many, many competitors out there, because you know there are many people trying to move towards driverless vehicles and certainly electric vehicles. That is true. And I'll leave you with this thought on this topic anyway. Michael Burry, who is the man behind the film The Big Short, he's one of the very few people who spotted the 2008 housing collapse and the global financial collapse that followed it. He has bet against Tesla to the tune of $530 million. He thinks that there is a lot of competition coming from Tesla and a long way to go before the company is completely secure. Jamie and Paul?
John, just a quick final thought on Afghanistan. We've spent a lot of this programme talking about it. I wonder, is the situation in Afghanistan rattling investors there?
Yeah, well, of course you spent a lot of time on it today, and I think the answer is yes. Certainly yesterday, the markets were down around 280 points at one point, the Dow was, and yet yesterday, Monday, they all recovered to have closing records on the Dow and the S&P 500. I think there's no doubt that investors are looking at this the situation. I think that press conference probably rattled a few people here, quite frankly. This little place here is its own ecosystem. I mean, it almost has its own weather here. And so it takes a lot to penetrate these walls and to get on investors' minds. But I think that certainly Afghanistan is. On top of that, though, we do today have retail sales that came out much worse than expected in July, down 1.1%. Automobile shortages is one reason. The shift to service industries is another in spending. This is stimulus checks begin to run out, and despite back to school, which of course is happening now as the kids go back to school, this retail sales figure was very interesting and much anticipated because it was the one that the Federal Reserve was most likely to use to determine when it should begin tapering the asset buying that is going on. I think also a little bit of China softening on Monday hasn't helped things, and the COVID Delta situation is the big one still. That really rattles investors because they really don't know just how bad this is going to get, when Delta is going to peak, and what's going to happen afterwards. So at the moment, then, the Dow, which was at a record close yesterday, is now down 1%, and all the others are down about 1% as well. Jamie and Paul?
John Terrace in New York. Thank you.
It's the UK's largest chip-making plant, and Newport Wafer Fab has just been bought by the Chinese firm Nexperia. The acquisition comes just weeks after Britain's Prime Minister ordered a national security review into the deal. CGTN's Andrew Wilson is following the story. So, Andrew, does this deal now mean that a national security review will not go ahead?
I think it means, Paul, that probably the National Security Advisor did have someone take a look at this deal, which was well signposted as coming down the line, and had nothing more to say about it. Bear in mind that 6 years ago, this wouldn't have raised even an eyebrow. The quoted purchase price is $87 million. That's only from one source, so we can't be sure that that's how much. It is a big microchip producer. It does produce semiconductors, which COVID has shown us are crucial to the advancing of the world economy. But they're not particularly cutting-edge semiconductors. They're not the 5G brand new one, so it's just a good, stable producer. And as I said 5 years ago to David Cameron, no one would have thought anything about a Dutch company owned by a Chinese company, which already has a plant in Manchester, buying these. But of course, the security controversy built up around Huawei UK last year has led certain backbenchers in the government to point out that they're concerned about anything electronic or communications-based going now into Chinese hands because of the potential geopolitical leverage that Huawei UK was accused of being in danger of exploiting should it get the chance. So there's an element of concern about it, but Downing Street's had nothing to say. Kwasi Kwarteng, the business secretary, has had nothing much to say in the last month or so about it, so it seems to have gone ahead. There's another purchase in the wings, ARM UK, which is another IT company, which is in the sights of NVIDIA. That's something else that they've got as the security advisor taking a look at, but again, nothing so far has come up that's considered controversial. And bear in mind that this is nothing compared to the estimated $200 billion of assets already owned in part or in whole by Chinese companies of parts of UK companies, UK assets and UK transport and energy facilities. So it is economically a drop in the ocean.
And in China, government measures to curb the internet sector are continuing. What's the latest there?
Yeah, that's more interesting in my view. And very interestingly, it mirrors very much what's going on in the United States and parts of Europe as well. In other words, there are concerned that tech companies are amassing too much power. Where have we heard that before? Of course, with all the conversations now going on in Congress about companies like Apple and Facebook and the kind of liberties that they take with their economic position. Well, something similar appears to be happening in China in terms of companies like Alibaba and Tencent and Baidu and TikTok and all the others. These are big, powerful companies, and they're starting to exercise a lot of that power in terms of how they direct their consumers and how they control their financial bases and so on. So there has been, as far as the Chinese administration is concerned, a long overdue need for some sort of regulation. The regulations that have come are very detailed, so they're not a knee-jerk reaction. They're pretty tough. Fines have already been dished out on various occasions, but it does seem to mirror pretty much everything that's being discussed in Congress about the US tech companies as well. This is a pushback from government, globally, if you like, to the influence and power created by tech companies over the last 10 years or so. One Chinese regulator who has been reported in the media as saying these are our oligarchs, referring, of course, to the runaway capitalist groups that were built up after the Soviet Union became Russia and the Berlin Wall and the rest of the Iron Curtain came down. Individuals who are building, perhaps as far as the state is concerned, a bit too much trouble. Now, if this carries on the way it's going, it'll be regulation, there'll be pushback, and it may create some ripples and disturbances. But by and large, the markets and analysts are saying this seems to be fairly straightforward. If it turns nasty, well, of course, then Beijing may turn to a more extreme box of tricks in its armoury, and then it may turn nasty and go from what can right now be considered something like a correction to becoming an unpleasant war, and that could be a slightly different story.
Andrew Wilson, thank you very much.
Well, let's just pick up on what Andrew mentioned there, because China's Tencent music shares fell 8.4% after markets closed. The drop came after Soros Fund Management sold its stake in the music platform. The company has been hit by Beijing's crackdown on tech giants and a ruling that will bar Tencent from exclusive music copyright agreements.
Mining giant Glencore is buying a stake in UK battery startup British Volt, a move aimed at boosting electric vehicle production. The deal includes a $4 billion investment in the UK's first large-scale battery factory in the northeast of England. Glencore is one of the world's biggest cobalt producers, and the company is promising to supply the metal, which is a key component of EV batteries.
BHP Group has reported its best annual profit in nearly a decade, just over $17 billion. The world's biggest listed miner is also shedding its petroleum business, part of a portfolio shake-up, and in a blow to the London Stock Exchange, BHP will end its dual-listed share structure, meaning it exits Britain's FTSE 100 blue chip index, where it's currently the biggest company.
You're watching CGTN, still ahead. Once it left a nasty taste in your mouth. Now, sales of British wine are soaring.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. China's Zhurong rover has now spent 90 days on the surface of Mars. It's travelled more than 800 metres from its landing point and collected a huge amount of data on the red planet. Sun Tianyan reports.
Designers of China's first Mars mission said on Tuesday the Zhurong has reached its initial working target of 90 days on Mars.
The last 90 days were a milestone, a complete success, yet our work carries on with thorough planning. So far, the orbiter is in good condition. The rover is also moving steadily ahead. It will go farther to continue the exploration.
Researchers say the Mars mission has helped China learn more about the red planet, providing valuable data and experience. The Mars mission is also expected to help China pave the way for more future deep space expeditions. The mission has so far collected over 420 gigabytes of data, including visuals of land features, analysis of soil samples, and readings of the atmosphere on Mars.
We have a better understanding of the atmosphere on Mars now. Normally, we believe temperatures on the planet are around -60 to -50 degrees Celsius. At this time of the year, the readings have been around -20 to -10 degrees at noon.
As the orbiter and rover continue transferring data, in the near future, Chinese scientists may receive information from the planet 400 million kilometers away every month. But before that, the machines have to go through a month-long period known as the transit.
Starting in middle September, the sun will go between Mars and Earth. That's when the two planets will be farthest apart. Radiation from the sun will affect radio communication of both the rover and the orbiter, so we may not be able to send or receive signals.
Experts say they are confident the rover and orbiter can pull through the solar outage in self-management mode before resuming signals in early November. Sun Tianyuan, CGTN, Beijing.
Now, it used to be the butt of dinner party jokes. British wine once left a nasty taste in your mouth and was almost undrinkable. But now British wine sales are soaring. 8.7 million bottles were produced last year, with some even winning international awards. Kitty Logan reports.
British wine, a surprise success and a growing industry. The winemaking group, WineGB, says vine planting increased by 70% in the last 5 years, with around 800 vineyards in the UK now. Many are in the south, such as the Bolney Wine Estate in Sussex. Sam Nintner manages this family-run winery.
We've just had fruit set, so these are...
She says the quality of once shunned British wine is steadily improving.
And I think what happened over the years is we've actually learnt our craft. We learnt how to train the vines in a way that we can grow really good quality and healthy crop and ripe crop.
The estate carefully cultivates 6 grape varieties, tucking the vines in summer to help ripening. In winter, technology monitors for frosts, sucking cold air from the crop. The changing climate is favouring UK wine producers. Warmer temperatures and more days of sunshine, all helping boost production. The Bolney Winery produced 150,000 bottles last year, and countrywide, wine production was up by a third. That's because people are buying more locally and importing less, though the government now says it will lift red tape on EU wine imports. But British wine producers don't believe their boom is Brexit-driven.
On average, over the last 10 years, we've probably grown between 25 and 33% every year, year on year. So the more wine we make, the more we sell and the more we keep growing. So it's really a question for us of catching up with production has to catch up with sales.
The aim is to mechanise more production to meet demand while keeping the quality in the fizz. Many of these wines are winning awards, levelling up to their European rivals.
So lots of lovely flavours and aromas coming through which people recognise, but just that little bit of freshness and cleanness coming through and slightly lower alcohol. So I think that really typifies our style.
The revival of British wine is also attracting people to wineries to sample the goods. And this winery is expanding its range of still wines like these, as well as the sparkling. And throughout this summer, there's a rush of visitors coming here to taste them. But there are challenges for the industry. A shortage of casual EU workers since Brexit to help with harvesting. Yet as vines take 5 years to grow, the time to invest is now.
The growth trend is set to continue. Sparkling wine, obviously everybody knows about English sparkling wine and that's super popular. But what's really interesting now is just seeing the still wines now beginning to gather some traction.
Those still wines account for a third of British sales, with sparkling the most popular. But whatever the type of wine, it seems British drinkers are set on staying close to home. Kitty Logan, CGTN, Sussex.
Well, surprisingly, for some people, wine isn't just for drinking. It's also becoming increasingly popular to invest in as people seek alternatives to the stock market. Tim Triptree is International Director of Wines and Spirits at Christie's Auction House. I asked him about the latest trends in investing in wine.
the sort of fine wine investment and certainly the auction world does still focus on the traditional old world. So, France does really still dominate the fine wine market. So the wines from Bordeaux, from Burgundy, from Champagne and the Rhone. So they do make up a large majority of what people do invest and collect. But we have seen a bit of a diversification in the market. So people are looking further afield to the wines, say, of Italy, the wines from Spain, for example, California, obviously, as well. So, there is a diversification, but I would still say that the focus for any collector or investor in wine should be the wines from France.
And who invests in wines? Are we talking about just connoisseurs and collectors?
One of my top tips is to, collect what you enjoy. So, after all, wines are there to be drunk and enjoyed. So I think the focus, you should really be knowledgeable about wine. But if you're not, then you should be employing someone like me, a master of wine, to give you advice on what to invest and collect.
I mean, presumably not all wines should be drunk. I mean, some are laid down and seen as long-term investments, aren't they? People keep them for years.
For example, the 2020 vintage of Bordeaux that has just been released this year onto the market as en primeur. So these wines will probably not be at their best for another decade or so. And then they'll be drinking for maybe another sort of 2 or 3 or even more decades. So but they do have a finite life. So part of I mentioned having a good knowledge of wine. You do need to know that wines do start to decline. So you can't hold on to your wines forever and expect them to still be drinkable. So that is a key aspect of the wine investing and collecting.
We've reported extensively on wildfires ripping across southern Europe and also the United States. I wonder how that's going to impact vintages in those wine-producing countries, because they're likely to be a feature of the future, aren't they?
What I saw was devastating, and yes, it is really going to impact, particularly those vintages. I mean, not only just burning, obviously, but also the smoke taint that is generated. So it is obviously a concern. But I think wineries are doing things to maybe lessen the impact. I mean, you're planting different grape varieties, perhaps planting at altitude where it's slightly cooler. So there are certain ways that wine producers can mitigate the impacts of climate change.
And presumably wine producers moving further north. We've seen a huge growth in the wine industry, even in the UK.
The UK is having some great vintages of particularly sparkling wines. So the climate now is not too dissimilar from the climate in Champagne and the chalk soils as well, particularly in the south of England. So we are seeing new vineyards being planted.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. We're also on smart TV apps like Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. Also at YouTube and Dailymotion, and CGTN.com and on the CGTN app.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.